Packers bring Woodson off the corner. Favre throws, touchdown, Sidney Wright. And Favre gives to Peterson, touchdown. And now takes a quick shot for Berrien, touchdown.
Well, gentlemen, on a lighter note, tonight on ESPN at 7 o'clock, they are rerunning the Monday Night Football Classic between the Packers and the Vikings from October 5th of 2009. This is the first time the Brett Favre Vikings took on the Green Bay Packers, and it was also one of the great 48-hour stretches in Minnesota sports history. In fact, we did a deep dive on this for Minnesota Sports Rewind just this morning. You can find that, Minnesota Sports Rewind, Apple, Spotify, or the Score North app. But this was Monday Night Football, Vikings-Packers, Brett Favre taking on his former team. And then it was the next night, game 163 between the Twins and the Tigers, just like the most ridiculously fun two-day period in the last 25 or 30 years of Minnesota sports. But every Monday here the last couple weeks, we do a new segment we like to call Alternate Reality, which I'm sure Mike Greenberg will steal very soon for Get Up on ESPN. We would expect nothing less.
Has
and
he not already?
We'd be honored if this happened. We'll get him on again, and we'll just pitch him the segment, and he can bring it on board. But, gentlemen, here's my alternate reality question for you, all right? And let's see how far we can take this premise. What if the Vikings in 2009 had beat the Saints in the NFC Championship game? What if Brett Favre decides, all right, I'm not going to throw a boneheaded interception across my body in field goal range. I'm going to run for a first down with broad daylight in front of me. Ryan Longwell's going to kick the ball through the uprights as one of the best kickers in the NFL. And we're going to go on to beat the New Orleans Saints at the end of the fourth quarter, just as they were supposed to do in that moment. What happens from that point forward? How would the Vikings have fared in the Super Bowl against the Colts? How would Favre be viewed as a Minnesota sports figure? And this is where I'd love Ramie's perspective because he was working in Milwaukee at the time. What would Favre's relationship with Green Bay fans be like if that happened?
By the way, too, just quickly, keep in mind, if the Vikings bench is not a mess, if Tahi does not get sent out on the field, there's a very, very good chance that eventually Longwell just comes on and wins the game with a field goal, and it's all done. So, like, there is a way here that Favre is not dropping back to throw that dumb pass. There is a very easy way, if you don't have 12 men in the huddle coming out of a timeout, gentlemen, that your kicker indoors, who didn't have a huge leg, but certainly had a good enough leg to make that field goal and was about as calm, cool, and collected as a kicker could be, kicks that field goal. You go on to the Super Bowl, and we're never talking about any of this extracurricular crap. That's a very clear path. I hate to say it because it hurts now, but that's a very clear path to a Super Bowl berth for the first time since the 1976 season in 2009 for your Minnesota
There's
Vikings.
Like 3 or 4 clear paths in that sort of 10-minute
like you never have to throw
sequence.
that stupid pass doesn't get thrown. It's never even there. So,
but I look at the Vikings and how they would have stacked up. They dominated the Saints in that game, and they just turned the ball over like 5 times. So they dominate the Saints in that game. The Saints then go on to the Super Bowl 2 weeks later, and they decimated the Colts. They beat Peyton Manning's Colts 31-17 in that game. And now in fairness, it was a pretty close game. Like, they were losing at halftime, and then they scored 15 unanswered in the fourth. So it wasn't like it was just a complete blowout. But the Saints were the better team in that game, and Drew Brees was mostly the better quarterback. So I think the Vikings would have gone on to beat the Indianapolis Colts, and they would have won their first Super Bowl in franchise history. And then from that point forward, all the different things, like Brad Childress, instead of being regarded as this bumbling idiot coach who gets fired in 2010, Brad Childress becomes the head coach that brought a Super Bowl championship to the Vikings, so along with Brett Favre.
He's not fired.
Brett Favre, instead of being this fun little story, and man, he came in and had a great year in 2009, Brett Favre becomes the Jack Morris. Jack Morris comes in for 1 year, gets it done,
and he never comes back.
Twins.
And nobody ever says, Brett, 2010, come back.
He would have just retired.
He's done. And so my guess is Tavares and Sage battle for the 2010 starting job. The Vikings can be bad. Childress does not get fired. Sidney Rice, if they win the Super Bowl, I think has the surgery that he balked at because the Vikings give him the contract extension, so we don't go through the whole Moss thing, which is ultimately what got Brad fired, right? And Ramie, here's what I will throw to you because I want your reaction of how this would have gone over in Green Bay. I'm almost certain the number 4 is retired by the Vikings before the Packers can do it.
Wow. Really?
Wow.
Super Bowl championship, one great season, the goal accomplished. Do you and
Ring of Honor and retired number?
One for sure, but my point is if Brett gets a Super Bowl, at that time he has now shoved it up the Packers, you know what, right? And is he not going to say, are you thinking about it? And are they not saying, you got us a Super Bowl? So Brett Favre is now closer than it certainly is now. Brett Favre, if the Vikings deliver on what we're saying, at least the two of us, Phil, would be a Super Bowl championship, Brett Favre is now sort of seen as the Vikings QB. Still the Packers, but I think they retire his number, Ring of Honor. And so my question to Ramie is, if that happens, what happens in Wisconsin?
I honestly don't know, Judd. I mean, the vitriol, the venom towards Brett Favre when he left, there was a little bit of it when he retired and then unretired and forced to trade to the Jets after he took a plane into town and tried to take Aaron Rodgers' job back from him. There was some contempt, some venom, some vitriol for him. But when he went to Minnesota, of all places, to play for the Vikings, of all teams, I don't know if I ever told you guys this. At my former station down in Milwaukee, at a local establishment, we had an event called the Farvecue.
No,
where we had a giant bonfire going for you to come and deposit your Brett Favre jersey into. We had a car that had the number 4 painted all over it that people could take a sledgehammer to and unleash some of their hostilities towards Brett Favre. The Farvecue, yes.
Okay, you know what? Because I've said this, because I've seen like videos of people burning their Favre jerseys, and then eventually, he goes back and he gets his number retired and all these things. Frauds. All of those fans are frauds. Every one of those Packer fans. If you threw away,
are they any more frauds than the ones who welcomed LeBron back with open arms after burning his jersey?
They're all the same.
Okay.
They're all the same.
All right.
Okay? A human being makes a decision. Not, by the way, the difference between Favre and LeBron James, like LeBron James could have stayed in Cleveland, could have signed, could have kept playing. He was in his prime when he left for Miami, right?
Yep.
So if I'm a Cavs fan, I have a little bit more right to be a little bit pissed that, he could have stayed and decided to go to Miami.
Right.
Okay, I know that the Favre thing with Green Bay went back and forth, and I'm not even blaming the Packers for moving on.
Yeah.
But the Packers moved on. Favre retired, the Packers moved on, and then Favre decided he wanted to come back, and the Packers were like, actually, we got Aaron, we're good, we drafted him.
And they were right.
And so if Favre wanted to keep playing.
Actually, Mike McCarthy said, and I quote, the train has left the station.
Right. And that's fine.
Yep.
And everyone should be fine with that. But if Favre wants to keep playing, it's going to be for other teams, not the Packers. So why are you burning his jersey? Like, that's what bothered me. Like, you guys,
the passion, the passion was so high.
And if you burn his jersey, then you don't get to welcome him back a few years later.
And the flip side of that was the joy, the utter glee that Packers fans felt when he threw that interception to lose the NFC Championship game to the New Orleans Saints.
Ridiculous.
The call of that was on a loop and probably still gets paid or played on my old station down in Milwaukee to this day of Brett Favre throwing that final interception that he threw in that fateful NFC Championship game. The joy of that moment was just like next to championships and playoff berths that I witnessed and covered during my time in Milwaukee. That was right up there with them. That's how much joy they took in Brett Favre failing as a Minnesota Viking wearing purple.
If Brett Favre wins a championship here, though, I think it takes years. Don't you guys? I think it takes years for him to get back in the good graces potentially with the Packers. I think it would have been.
Sure.
It would have been such a long process. But
I don't know if it would have happened and maybe it happens by now because it's been 10 years. It certainly doesn't happen within 5 or 6 years.
It's more lukewarm by now, though, right? Like I could see them. Okay, let's say it happened now, and he comes back to Green Bay. But I don't think it's the all is forgiven. Brett, we still love Brett, right? Which we definitely saw. I think if it happens now, it's still very much, here's your blazer. We appreciate 16 years, but you won a bleeping Super Bowl as a Viking. I will say this, though, and I'm not saying that the results are always good. Do you guys, in your lifetime, has there been an athlete experience like the Favre coaster?
I mean, not in Minnesota sports that I can think of.
But I'm trying to think of just all, because the one thing with Brett is his last act in Green Bay, and then of course in the conference championship game against the Saints, the last act is the tragedy, and it's the most Favrean thing.
You're talking about like
I'm
Favre at
talking
every
about
stop.
yes, I'm talking about the Favre coaster ride.
Was
That
his last
includes-
pass with the Jets an interception too?
Did it matter? But the Giants game, that terrible
might have been.
pass. But I just think that if you go and look at Brett and all the things that Brett brings and all the great fun stuff that Brett brings, there's also this sort of footballian tragedy to end Brett's runs that make you take a step back and say, what was that?
But see, here's how close we were to this playing out so much differently, and all the different key figures involved, because it played out the way that it did in 2009. The Favre era with the Vikings is looked at as this little fun fling in the summer, right? Well, that was, man, we almost pulled the ultimate troll job on the Packers. If Favre would have hoisted a Super Bowl trophy, like, no, they were literally like a play away. If we think they would have beat the Colts, they were like one play away from that troll job actually happening.
Yeah.
They were, let's say, one play away from Brad Childress being regarded as one of the greatest coaches in Vikings football history. That's a legitimate thing that would have been discussed. Well, Bud Grant had, 15 years and brought the Vikings to 4 Super Bowls, but Brad Childress got it done and won 3 divisions or whatever would have, what the final total would have been. That's how we wouldn't have talked about Brad Childress as this crappy coach who got brought along. No, he would have been the coach that has the only Super Bowl championship in Vikings history.
Oh, you very well could have turned on him later.
Maybe.
I can tell you that from firsthand experience. But Packers fans wanted Mike McCarthy gone by the end of his tenure with the Packers.
But in the end, like once you get a few years away from the Mike McCarthy thing, and then you look back and have some perspective on it, Mike McCarthy is the second best coach in Packers history, or maybe third, right? Probably third behind Mike Holmgren. It probably goes Lombardi, Holmgren into McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
But the other things that would have happened, I think in 2010, I don't think you train wreck the way that you did because you've got your Super Bowl and now you can think about roster construction for the future instead of trying to run it back, right?
Yeah.
So you don't bring Randy Moss in, like that doesn't happen. Tavares Jackson probably just starts 2010 as your new franchise quarterback, and who knows what would have happened? Probably wouldn't have worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But you would have looked to get a little younger going into the 2010 season because you already have your Super Bowl.
Right.
So you're not going to just run it back again. You're going to build the next 3 or 5 years.
And Favre is gone.
Favre doesn't come back.
He's going home.
You don't have like this weird. I don't think there's tension between Sidney Rice and the organization.
No,
I don't think you go gangbusters and win back-to-back Super Bowls by any means, but I don't think you train wreck and fire a coach in 2010, which means I don't think you draft Christian Ponder in 2011. So I think you avoid one of the biggest Vikings draft pick busts ever. You're one play away from that string of events taking place.
So I think if Brad, you're right, doesn't get fired in 2010. I think Childress is probably here through at least 2012 or 13.
Wow.
For sure. So the Frazier years don't take place. And here's the most important thing, if that's the case, that potentially plays out. Childress had control of the 53-man roster. So unless he liked Ponder, you're not taking Ponder. You're not taking anybody. McNabb, I don't think, gets here. So the entire construction going forward and thought processes into the time that Brad is gone are now changed completely.
Yeah, T-Jack would have been the starting quarterback. Rest in peace, Tavares Jackson. But he would have been the starting quarterback 2010, probably 2011.
Okay.
And then depending on how things go,
yeah,
they probably would have given him, hey, you get a 2-year runway to do this thing. We're sorry about the false starts. Like, yeah, we didn't fully commit to you in 2007-8. We had Gus Frerotte and Brett Favre. They probably commit to him for a 2-year stretch in 2010, 2011. and then we'll see what then that would have been like whatever happens in that 2-year stretch. Brad Childress and T-Jack are tied together after having a Super Bowl championship.
No Ponder though, man. Those Christian Ponder years were so much fun, Phil. I don't know what you're talking about.
Man, it's amazing. So
his
that's
jersey,
alternate reality.
His jersey in the rafters, U.S. Bank Stadium.
I agree. I think he would have been considered just as much of a Viking as a Packer if he wins a Super Bowl.
Do the Vikings have any policy on when they retire numbers? Because I think the Packers they don't retire your number until you're in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
The Vikings, I don't know about that.
So they could have done it before the Vikings, unless the Vikings were willing, or excuse me, unless the Packers were willing to break that protocol.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think if they win a championship, the completion of the troll is in 2012 or so. Please welcome Brett Favre, number retirement ceremony. It's the complete troll, right?
God, it would have been hilarious.
Think about seeing the troll job through.
Ring of Honor for sure.
Oh, without a doubt. But if you think about the potential to stick it to the Packers, just in a legit way, but in the cruelest way possible. If you take a guy that played 16 years there and was a hero, and then joined you for 1 year, at which point you got your first and only Super Bowl title, man, pro sports it's petty. It makes some sense.
I also get the sense, just sort of listening to Favre do interviews and watching the way Favre now interacts again with the Packers and Packer fans, he's not ashamed of that 2 years, I guess, with the Vikings, but he's a little bit like, he knows that he definitely left his wife for a couple years there.
Oh, yeah.
The divorce never got fully finalized, but they were on a break. It's
He's
like that Friends episode. We were on a break.
He's not going to talk about it.
So he gets a little sheepish when those Vikings years come up. But if you would have won a Super Bowl, then you can't stiff arm the Vikings era anymore. It's part of your DNA.
Brett is a super smart dude. And I think what Brett knows is that right now he is seen as a Packer, right? A Packer great. So I think if Brett were to come out now and be like, yeah, you know what I'd really like to talk about? In 2009, because I was great, which he was. He knows that would diminish the value of what makes Brett Favre, which now is Brett Favre, Hall of Famer from the Packers. So I think Brett is smart. It would be fun to get Brett to sit down and say, let's forget the BS for a second here, and let's talk about that year, because it was magical. It was fun. And if you're a Viking fan, what hurts the most is there's no really good reason why it didn't end with at least Super Bowl appearance. There really isn't.
The ultimate comparison is Jack Morris, because Jack Morris is regarded widely as a Detroit Tiger. He was the pitcher of the 80s with the Detroit Tigers, right? Jack Morris. And he pitched 1 year with the Minnesota Twins. And that 1 year was a World Series championship and him having one of the most prominent, amazing games as a starting pitcher in baseball history. Game 7, 10 innings, a gem, a shutout. And did that 1 year override 10 years of being a Tiger? In my mind, I don't think it overrode it, but I think it put it. I think when I think of Jack Morris, and part of it's because like I grew up and that was the first season I remember watching, and Jack Morris was the ace of that staff. But I think of Jack Morris equally Twins legend because of that one season, that one game, and Detroit Tiger.
2 words for you: hired gun.
Yeah,
mercenary.
Super fun.
I don't know if Packers fans would have got over it if he won the Super Bowl, because one of their favorite things, one of their favorite things is to hold it over Vikings fans' heads.
Yep.
That empty trophy case that y'all got. They love doing that. And if you took that away from them, what do they have? Really, when you talk about the Packers-Vikings rivalry, what do they? If you took the greatest player in the history of their franchise and won your only Super Bowl,
it would have been so fun.
Oh man,
Ramie, this close.
I know.
They were this close.
I wanted you to do. I was rooting for Brett Favre and the Vikings while that was going down. I'm a Bears fan. I got nothing but contempt for the Packers.
Think about how much fun that would have been. My God, Brett
it was
Favre
already fun,
the,
you guys.
The bleeping Lombardi Trophy.
It was fun, and it got stopped short.
Watching Packers fans lose their absolute damn minds during all that was just so enjoyable for me. So enjoyable.
So great. So great. Yeah, I think we brought this question up on Minnesota Sports Rewind too. When you think of in this game, the Vikings Packers from October 5th, 2009, Monday Night Football is going to run tonight on ESPN. So check it out at 7:00 tonight. Of the last three, but